competing in, we are repeating in, we are believing in. It's time for us to shift our mind from best in the world to best for the world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. It creates a new world to mind a shift, intentionality, perceptuality, conceptuality. We are choosing to shift our mind to best for the world, best for our world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional.
Welcome back to the second last program of today, and the live program at least. Welcome to FiDE, the Foundation for Intentional Decisions. My name is Jens Rinnelt. I'm joined with my colleague Stella Nordahl. And today we would like to talk about the intentional decision model in itself. We had two previous sessions already where we talked about the tree metaphor as a model for complexity, as a metaphor for describing complexity, and a metaphor for choosing life-affirming systems. We also had in the first session, we looked at the history of ideas, if we can say it like this, the history that led towards a dualistic worldview, and we found at least one different way of looking at this division, where we realized maybe there is no distinction, or the describing the world in this dualistic worldview is actually incongruent in itself. So it's actually by measuring something on the outside with just external ways of measuring it, it is actually a loophole. It is basically a circular argumentation, and therefore it is doubtful if it's actually valid. Stella, do you have anything that you would like to add to this quick summary?
No, I think it was a good summary, and I would like us to, before we go into the intentional decisions in more specific, actually come back to the previous models that we were and the dialogues that we had. So we will deepen them a little. First of all, I would actually like to do a personal reflection on this. I think it's appropriate always to have some kind of we can call it personal reflection. And the thing I'm thinking of is that I've had an extreme intense weekend, and of course you can think of it as something that is from outside in, as we talked about. But it can also be from inside out. For many people, intense means stress. And I can admit that there have been some occasions during this weekend that were in terms of stressfulness, but most of it wasn't that at all. It was intense. So, then one can think of how can there be different descriptions of what is happening. And one is that you actually only experience it as different from each other. But I would also say that is also what you put out. So in lack of better word, the energy in the room, it's affecting everyone. It's also affecting the causality. So this is actually what I want to have as a personal reflection. First of all, that I must say we have had a very interesting causality this weekend, where things have opened up. We have experienced so many thoughtful ideas, inspirational dialogues from all over the world, from people from from different thought models, also thought systems or worldviews. So that's interesting in itself, and that's my personal reflection that I want to take in. But maybe we can come back to that reflection during the dialogue to see how it applies on different stuff. Is that okay?
I can also give a small reflection on how I experienced this weekend so far. And I mean, besides being super grateful and I mean, what these co-creators, what you guys here have created, we have is just I'm having trouble finding words actually. It has been fantastic, and it has been beyond my expectations, to be honest. So I'm super grateful for that. First of all, we have created 80 hours of live content. We had over 50 different concepts. Like you said, we had more than 100 people from all over the world co-creating this weekend together, finding ways that are in the direction that is best for the world. And of course, we have been, you can say, it has been intense. I mean, I would describe my own personality as really more calm attitude. And what I've heard also from many people is that after they have engaged with me, or had spent some time with me, they have calmed down as well. So picking up on what you said is like, what energy do I bring into the room? What do I bring to the table, so to say? And how is this really affecting other people in the room? That has always been a very fascinating pattern for me to observe.
Yeah, and when things are joyful, it's always more fun. A colleague of mine, he says that it has to be joyful, but to be when you have fun. Otherwise, it's not funny. So or something like that. So it's quite interesting. Yes. Okay. So what I want us to do now is to recall what the ideas that we have been talking for. And first of all, we started out just as you said by talking about the history of ideas leading to the world view, the Western world view we have today. And we were actually looking at, or we were painting this little picture here. It says a mental pole and a physical pole, and it implies that there is a linear model, and that is called the inner and outer. So in this case, the behavior and actions is the outer world, and then it's divided by this green line, and then beliefs and thoughts are in the inner world. This is much more, this is what we have been taught, and we have not only been taught this, it's actually what we believe is it's a truth. And this is a truth that came into the Western world 300 years ago, as Descartes stipulated, I think, therefore I am, and created the so-called Descartesian dualism. And we talked about what it does to people and societies and organizations, and 150 years ago or so, during the industrialization became very, so to say, one-sided. So we got to value the outer world, which, according to Descartes, is the measurable, what we can measure. So what we're talking about there in that program was that this has to, in itself, it has some kind of a innate problem, as we are calling it, an inner and outer. It some kind stipulates a spatial difference, and it separates us. So that was the conclusion of the first part of that program, and the second part of it was, what if we can find a non-linear model for being able to talk about life and complex systems and organizations and also societies. And then we introduced the tree metaphor, and maybe you can say something about it, and what I'm showing right now for you who are not listening, or you're following or for you who are listening to the radio and not following the YouTube live. This is what it looks like.
So basically we have 4 trees. The tree metaphor, yeah. So it is one tree. We have been drawing a lot of trees on this weekend, and have been being quite in contact with Mother Earth. So I'm already seeing a whole forest. But looking specifically at one tree as a metaphor for a metaphor for the complexity of life and a non-linear model of making sense of the world, is to consider the holistic aspects of a tree. And we have divided, is not the right word, but we used some categorization here in order to talk about the different aspects of a tree.
Different functions.
Different functions, exactly. So what you can see is on the left-hand side is a personal and individual function, and on the right-hand side you can see the organizational, collective, or societal function. And then when you look at the tree, what you normally would perceive as standing above the ground, the more observable part of the tree, is basically the exterior perception. And then when you look below the surface into the soil, you see the roots, which is the interior functions of a tree.
And for those who have ever taken up a tree or moved a tree, it is quite big. It's the double size as we can see. So this is a nice metaphor, as you just walked us through it. What we can that we can perceive more than we can see. And there is a lot of arrows there, and they mean that we need to connect the various functions in the tree, and when they are connected, it's also whole, and the tree doesn't separate it from itself. So if you cut it along the surface, it doesn't say now you cut off my stem
I will live
crown, the crown and stem, and then it says now I die, or now you cut off my root and root system, now I die. So it dies.
Whenever there's a function missing, the whole system suffers basically.
The whole system suffers, and it also connected. And in the tree, overall, all places in the tree, the whole tree exists. So this is a fantastic model for talking about complex systems and also for connecting them to each other. So it can have a personal side, an organizational side, a societal side, and a world side. So we use this to describe life or an organization or a society. And when we had gone through that, the next program was dedicated to talk about consciousness levels and how you can look at the tree model and also connect it to the liner model that we have been taught. And then we have this forest then. So now it's time for the forest, Jens. Will you walk us through this too?
Yes, so basically what we see is 4 trees, and the trees are whole in all the description. However, they differ in the way that if you start on the right hand side, you are only perceiving the crown of the tree. And that means this specific kind of tree, if it looks towards all the rest of the forest, towards the other trees, it will only perceive the crown of the tree as well. It doesn't mean the rest of the tree doesn't exist. It is more that you will only perceive the other trees at the level of the crown.
We also denominated it the what.
Exactly. So this is the what level.
And that tree, it's we also have that name for that tree. It's called the physical me. And you elaborated a lot on this earlier today in another program. Can't you just give us the name of the program you were hosting earlier? Was it today? Yeah, I guess it was. About the reinventing framework and workplace.
You are talking about the evolution of work?
Yeah, that's the one.
The evolution of work, yeah. And an example basically would here be, if you are a little bit familiar with the development of work, that it would be the physical aspect of work. So where we use mainly our hands to create value. These are examples, for example, in classical tribal hunter-gatherer societies, in the agricultural revolution, but also in the industrial revolution, where physical hands on an assembly line are actually the main focus and the main
and the
source of value creation.
Wheels in the machinery,
Mm-hmm.
and all the mechanical parts. Right?
Exactly.
So the next tree, then we went through that too. The formal we tree. It has new abilities.
Yes, it basically gains a level, and we denominated this level as the how level. It connects. It is described also as the formal we, and we because it makes relationships between trees, or maybe more specifically between people, observable. So that means if this kind of tree looks towards the other trees, it sees again the what and the how level in the other trees.
And both of those are only have the ability to perceive physical things that are seen and measured in time and space. Length, length, width, height, and so on.
Yeah, maybe an example from a social network perspective would be how many friends you have on Facebook. You know, there you have the relationship towards another person. So that is what I'm referring to as the relationship. And what you're saying, it makes this relationship visible, because now a relationship is displayed in form of having a friend on Facebook.
Okay. Nice, nice explanation. So now I know how Facebook relates to this model. That's great. Okay, so and then we walked over an invisible line, or for many people, when you do that, it's actually when you get aware of your own. You become conscious of your own consciousness, so to say. This is the line where not only what you see exists, there is also more to it than just the measurable world. And then we move over this invisible but also sharp line.
Yeah, and maybe that's the issue with Facebook, because it only creates connections, but it doesn't, have a deeper meaning, which is actually the essence of the creative together tree, which has the third level of why. And as you said, it understands the context of why do we exist, why is this tree actually in the forest, and what specific role has this tree to play in relation to the rest of the forest.
Yes, and as they now can see also the whys, it can also see that there is a why even on the more physical side of this model, or we shouldn't use those words maybe, but more the first three, the physical me and the formal we. So you can actually, from the creative together, see how they have some kind of a driving force. Maybe they are aware of it, but very most often they're not. And then, as from created together perspective or perception, you can actually see those driving forces.
Yeah, it is more like maybe these driving forces are mirrored to you because they are represented in the other trees, even though, as you said, the other tree is maybe not conscious or aware of these driving forces themselves.
Oh, that's right. And then we have the fourth tree. We have denominated as given it the name Conscious United. And well, what can we say about it then?
Well, at least that it has another level, which is the root level, and for the current understanding, it makes the tree whole. As you said, this is described as conscious united, and it is basically the same pattern as before. If this tree looks into the forest, it sees and all these four levels are mirrored back to this tree.
So and at this point you actually you become aware that everyone maybe now that can see this on YouTube, you see this in the bottom of everything of the picture, it says choice. And for you our listenings, this is actually what we're going to talk about today, the choice and the intentional decision model. And at that point you realize that your choices is not only in the physical what and how, it's also in the metaphysical why and root. So you can actually choose your way of looking at the world. That means that it's a choice where you actually define or where you put yourself in this little forest, and it at some point, I don't know exactly where, maybe that was when we already crossed this thin line, maybe that was already then that we got humble for that we don't have the truth. We just have seen parts maybe of it, or whatever we can call it. And that also means that there could be a fifth or a sixth or whatever number tree in this wood. So you realize when you cross this line, which we say being conscious about your own consciousness, that there is more than what we can see.
Yeah, and what we can also realize at this point, I guess, is that having a physical pole and a mental pole doesn't really come together anymore, because this would be a contradiction in itself. If you think about it and say, well, either the world is materialistic or the world is metaphysical, you have a problem, because one of the options can't be true. So and
I've never thought of it that way.
it must be either or. So either it is totally physical, then we have no validation and we shouldn't actually have experiences and thoughts, or it is totally mental, totally metaphysical, but then how could we explain physical objects that we interact with every day? So it is more, what I'm trying to get at here is that we can also see a direction, as you described, a direction of how can a physical object exist in a metaphysical universe. And that is where I would describe it as, and that is something we talked about before, the dynamic, the metaphysical becomes dense at some point at a specific time and place in history, and therefore creates a...
Yeah, we can look at this liner model again. Just to recall it, we had the green line separating the Descartesian dualistic worldview, but then there is this black line, and that is actually connected to an alternative definition of the inner and outer world, which we also had in the first program. So I just show it to people what it's all about. The idea here is that the inner world is the dynamic world and the outer world is the static world. And then the question was to ourselves, can our behavior be both dynamic, or can they be dynamic and or static? And we realized, yes, they can. Can the thoughts be dynamic or static? Yes, they can. Can the beliefs be dynamic and static? Yes, they can. And the interesting thing with this is that either it's actually dynamic or it's static. Okay, it can be like a direction to going to static or direction going to dynamic, but it's more like there is a distinct line, just as Descartes was looking for a distinct line. It has to be a definition with it, which is solid, because you can't drift on it. And that is actually what is also happening if you stick with this Cartesian dualism. You can now ask yourself, can thoughts be measured and so on? But to get rid of that problem, we could use another definition. If we need an outer and inner and outer world, this is a more appropriate, I would say, definition, because we already have physical and metaphysical as a description for this the tree. So we leave this linear model now for a while, and the next step will then be to elaborate on the intentional decision model. And for that purpose, we have set up here in the room a new little board here, which you all can see if I shift to this view. So here's a board, and the idea now is to stepwise go through the intentional decision model and see how it is actually the same as the little forest that we were visiting before. So first of all, I would like to write a word. I write it here. It says empathy. And I write over here sympathy. Okay, so there is a question first then. Is empathy and sympathy the same thing? This is a very interesting question, actually, which I've been asking, I don't know how many people during the years. And the idea here is that a lot of people haven't reflected on this. So, first of all, is there a difference or is it the same? After a while, we can conclude, okay, it maybe not is the same. So what is what then? And then I would often describe sympathy as feeling sorry for. For instance, Jens, if you cry, you sit there in your chair and you cry. I cry with you. It could be good-hearted, but it hasn't got any, what shall I say, intent of understanding why you are sorry, or what is troubling you. And definitely not the intent of having a solution for it. So it could be very good-hearted. I would say I could sit besides you and cry together with you. And if you're being a little tough on it, one could say that I'm actually amplifying the context or the state you're already in. You were going to say something here.
No, I was exactly leading to this, because this would be sympathizing by taking exactly the same level of energy or getting into the same state as I am. And then sometimes this is helpful, sometimes this is but as you said, I see it more also from the perspective of it amplifies already what is there. So it is not in any way trying to change what is there, not in any way trying to think about how can we get out of this. And I'm saying this is what we heard also in many of these programs. It is kind of a place of acceptance. So it has its value. We're not saying it doesn't have its value, but we're also saying there is something beyond simply sympathizing and putting yourself in the same state as somebody else.
Yes, and if we look at it again, as you say, that it has to do with acceptance. What I would also say, it depends on where you are in this forest. So if you are in the sympathy level concerning acceptance, it is what you have to accept, more like resignate to what is. It's very physical. You have to, at best, relate to this, again, outer world, because that's the worldview that we're talking about. Okay, so sympathy, while mentioning then empathy as something, as an ability to understand another person or another point of view, and to put yourself in that, we can call it person for a while, but the model doesn't say it has to be persons. It could be any conscious agent at all. It could even be a future you. So empathy is about the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And when you think of that, it actually have two main functions. One of these functions is that you can, how can I say it? You can understand out from. Let me put it like this: the physical understanding. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Makes you walk their miles. You're walking in them, so you have a physical feeling of it. But it's also not only that. It's also the ability to put yourself there. That is fantasy, more or less, or dreaming, or whatever you can call it.
You're not physically putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else.
Yeah, no, you're not.
But you have to use your own fantasy. You have to own your imagination.
Imagination, fantasy. But when you do it, it is like you walking their shoes. So there is, as you said before, there is no difference in it. So and the interesting thing here is that when we use that kind of definition, it goes way beyond how we look at empathy in today's Western society. Empathy is then seen as feeling another person's feelings
and understanding where it's coming from.
And not in the dominant worldview.
Not in the dominant, yeah.
No. But we're taking it from there via what you just said and up until the next step, which means dreaming. As you know, the lucid dreaming is you have maybe sometimes a lot of people have very lucid dreams without actually reflecting on what that means, but that means that you are physically present in that dream. And in that dream, there is no time and space. But at the same time, there is time and space. So you can put yourself in another time, in another space, and you have physical feeling of it. Very often, small kids, they are so close to it. So when they play, they don't play. It's real. It's reality as we know it. So there is no difference in it. So it's just a way of using words. So okay, we should write 2 more words while we have the board up.
And the words are proactivity and reactivity.
Did I spell it right?
Activity, yes.
This should be a V. Okay, so proactivity and reactivity. So first of all, reactive. We all get reactive, so it doesn't imply that you don't get reactive. Okay, so reactivity. If we study that word, it's to be a step behind, right? Something has happened, and you have to react. While proactivity is to be a step ahead. You're taking, so to speak, the lead or something. Is that a okay definition for you? You're thinking, or I see it?
I'm thinking, yeah. I was thinking of if it always implies that reactivity is related to something physical. You know, it is, I think, most often used in that context, but I don't think it has to be only related to it. But to give an example, maybe is the reactivity towards the coronavirus right now. So we are reacting on this situation and direction can be in different ways.
Yeah, I do agree there. And when we talk about the difference between proactivity and reactivity, very often we think of it being a step behind or a step in front. But we will see in a while in this model that it brings more to the table, actually. It brings more to the table. Okay, so we can also say that empathy, sympathy, and proactivity, reactivity, in the wordings of the ID model, it's called dimensions. We will also use the word guiding principles later on, but so you know that it's the same in this context. But we can use the name or denomination dimensions for a while. And then there is the third dimension, so I'm going to write that too.
And the first word is engagement. And the second one is attendance.
Yes, so it's about both the personal level, of course, and the organizational level, group level, or even a societal level. So attendance means to be, if we call it, physical present, period. So, and engagement is to engage. To engage. And engagement very often implies that you have to be more than one. It doesn't have to, as if you look at it from a personal level, but it can also be engagement as working together. So together is something that is similar almost. And what we now have is three dimensions: empathy, sympathy, proactivity, reactivity, and engagement, attendance. But we also have another grouping, more or less. You can see the three words over here and the three words over here. It's not that they are synonyms in any way, but they are in the same spirit. So if I can draw, this is just imaginary, but you can use your imagination here to see that there is. Oh, now realize I have to use the same pressure. Okay, so what we can see now is that we have more or less two, and this is just for imagination, so you shouldn't like categorize things into this, but it's more like directions. But it's interesting to see it that they are related. So on the right hand side, sympathy, reactivity, and attendance, it's actually puts us in a victim mode. You are a victim of circumstances. Can you even read what it says?
Yes, I can. And you just said it.
Yeah, but is it readable? Because now I use the same, a little bit bigger letters. So on the left hand side we can call it creator mode or creator possibilities. So it's more or less two very different worldviews. Either you live your life, just for now I use it, outside in, or you connect the inner and outer world. And the interesting here is that what the model itself says, it has one very fundamental assumption, and that is that there is always a choice. So I write choice down here somewhere. To do either this or this. But think of it as directions for a while. It almost looks as if I wrote choke, but it says choice. Okay, so to be able to choose, you have to have a ground, a stable ground of some sort. We can write that also, so we have that on the board here. It says resources. So you need some kind of resources, and it doesn't have to be physical. It can be all parts of all types of resources. mental, it could be physical, it could be you have to have water, you have to have food, you have to have sleep, but it could also be you have to have calmness or energy or whatever. And when we talk about a group of people or a society, it's also about interrelations. What is the quality of the relations we have? You want to say something there? Yes.
No, I think you're leading through this in a very understandable way.
So far, so good. Okay. So
I'm engaged by reflecting and thinking about it, but nothing that I can add at this point. Besides that there are different ways of course in getting into these creating these resources, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Some of them we have had in the program during the weekend. And maybe this is already leading us to the next point.
Yeah, it does. Because then you can think of, okay, so instead of thinking of what do I need and what do I lack or whatever, you can think of what do we already have. So in this direction, now I use word as processes, tools, and stuff like that. What takes us in that direction? So maybe I can make it a little bit more clear. So something like that. What takes us in this direction? What process do we have? What tools do we have? What concepts do we have? And then the same in this directions. Because if we see that there is some kind of I wouldn't say good or bad, but if there are some things that we find interesting in moving in this direction, then let's find out what we already have and let's boost those kind of setups. And if we can also use this model to identify those who are holding us back or taking us into a victim mode, what if we can maybe shut them down or at least minimize the effect of it? So this is quite interesting in itself, I guess. And we can also talk about choices. There is, of course, always a question is, do you always have a choice? And just to elaborate on that very, very short, I would say that this model says that there is always a choice, but it's maybe not that you're unaware of it. So it has to do about awareness in some sense, and it also has to do with the consciousness level, because the higher consciousness level you are in, and this is where we relate to those trees, the more choices you can see. So what happens here is that, first of all, and now I use those drawings that we had on the previous pictures. First, when you're about to choose, if you come from this direction for a while, this hasn't to do with each other. See if I can. That was much to hold. Okay, so first of all, you want possibilities. You want many possibilities, right? One can think of it as you would like to have a dynamic state here. You want many possibilities, and you wouldn't like to have the one who says we already tested that, or we have done that before, or no, it's not possible, or anything like that.
That would basically be what you described as you only perceive as this is the only way. So, and maybe in that regard, it seems like you don't have a choice because you're only aware of one way forward.
Exactly. So, at the first part, the first third of the process of choosing, you want many possibilities. And the interesting thing is that you get those by choosing empathy over sympathy, proactivity before reactivity, and engagement over attendance. So that is the idea. So every time you take a step in that direction, empathy over sympathy, proactivity over before reactivity, and engagement over attendance. You get more possibilities. And then, in the next step, we would like to choose, right? And when you choose, you do that more or less instantly. It's not like it's an instant choice. And when you have chosen, and when you do that, you need some kind of a framework to map your your decisions to. And right now in the Western world, we don't have an ethical framework because, right or wrong, I don't know. But when we took the religion out of the society, we also took the framework for decisions. So this means that we need that. And you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking of what I'm hearing lately is often, we shouldn't say flying is good or bad. I mean we can talk about it from a scientific point of view and sustainability point of view. What are the effects of flying? But then when it comes to personal choice, the kind of narrative that I'm hearing is, well, it is up to the individual person to choose, and we shouldn't interfere in the personal choice of that person to make that decision. And that is what I think you're referring to, is simply in the lack of having an ethical framework. So we put all the responsibility on the individual person to make a choice, but we don't equip the individual person with a
ability to choose.
With the ability to choose, exactly.
Yeah,
how do I make my choices actually? In which direction? What is a preferred direction for choosing?
Yeah, and it actually gets a little bit mean actually to say that to a person that you now it's up to you, but you don't have the ability to choose. So it's a what do you call it? It's a kind of a no situation.
Yeah, and I think I see it most often, when you think about big corporations, big pharmacy, or, whenever there is this direction of pushing the responsibility from societal level or from an organizational level to the individual, it seems for me almost like an excuse to not being responsible, and therefore pushing the ability to choose to the individual person.
Yeah.
But this is only done, I think, because the organization or the society wants to get out of their inability to choose.
Yeah, inability and victim mode. That as long as you put in some kind of guilt into the game, then it's a guilt game, more or less. You have to find something to blame, and very often when we talk about responsibility, it's actually about who to blame. So yeah, you got a point there. So moving on here is that to be able to choose, then we need an ethical framework, and then we can use the ID model again. We can use empathy over sympathy, proactivity before reactivity, and engagement over attendance, and using those as guiding principles, there is the word, for our choices. And let's say that we now have chosen wisely, and what do we then want? We want the effect of that choice, right? We don't want anyone saying, oh no, did we do the right choice, the doubt, and so on. So then we want the static part, and we can call it convergent, right? So then interesting thing here is a very often used word is implementation. But the implementation in the using the ID model is already done, as you have already practiced those principles in the two first steps by opening up for possibilities. And then when you're mapping your choices to your ethical framework, you use the same principles, and then it's time for the effect, and then you're used to those principles, and then you get the effect more or less by default, I would say. So that is the fundamental parts of this model, and when we look at it, it's actually what we are told here is that we shouldn't categorize people at all or organizations, but it is a language that can help us to identify where we should go. And also, when we talk about consciousness level, it's very interesting because we have also an ability to choose the right tools and the right processes and the right models and the right whatever it is concepts for the system we work in.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have carefully listened and watched our content over the weekend, I hope we made it clear that we never said we have the answer or this is the truth. What we always said is that there is a direction that is best for the world, and here are different, as you said before, methods, tools, ways to increase your resources, to increase your ability to choose, and in that way guide yourself through intentional choices, conscious choices, into the direction that is best for the world.
Yeah, that's right. And again, if we look at this board, we said victim of circumstances, victim mode, and here we said creative mode or creative possibilities. We can use some words for an organization also, so we know what we're looking for. So this is the someone elseism, and this is the what can we call it? Creative possibilities, but also a possibility, a realm. And you use those words, best in the world and best for the world. So this is a direction of best in the world, for the world. Sorry, best for the world. So, and it includes. This is the interesting thing. And now I'm going to do something you shouldn't do, and that is to say that you shouldn't have. I shouldn't have done those rings in the first place, because it actually means that from this side it includes what is already. It's like this, but now it gets messy. You can also think of it just the opposite way. But this is just for you who are interested in level of consciousness and consciousness development and stuff like that. But now you probably will see that it resembles what you have seen before. The thing in this model is that we actually introduce a new theory of causality, and we connect that to a new theory of choice. And that is probably something we need right now in the world. A new theory of causality and a new theory of choice. You're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just trying to maybe explain it with different words, what you said. And because you spoke about a different model of causality, and what does this imply? I think that implies, for example, that we looked at the world in this linear way of cause and effect. So it is at least, we have spoken also in this program of the Kinefin framework, so it is at least, or at maximum, a complicated way of looking at the world. So there's always cause and effect, and if I'm not aware of it, someone else is, and this is where expertise is required. I'm buying in external consultants, for example, to provide me helping to understand the causality.
And if we use the little wood for a while, one could say that causality lies in the green parts of the trees. So when you look at the picture now, if you're a YouTuber, and then causality is in the green parts. So for the physical me, the causality is in the watts, or in the crown. And for formal we, it's the causality is in the watts and house. But that is not true, because there is a greater causality again. It has the whole tree, but this is only what you believe are causalities. So the rest, it's called, it could be called chance, random. If
the work of gods.
Yeah, definitely the work of gods or magic, things that you can't see the causality for. And as we go then into creator mode, and now you also see there is all the same denominations in top of in this picture, the victim mode and the creator mode. And what we can also see that that those circles that we used in the other drawing, we can actually put them up in I don't know if we can put them next to each other. I see if I can do that. There is some kind of don't know how it works, but I just shift there, and when I do, you see that there are two circles again. That is actually where you are in the woods, and looking at the right hand side, that is where we are as the Western world right now, here in this best in the world paradigm. And what we need to do is to work for what is best for the world, to move in this direction. And we can also look at it as a more or less continuous. There is continuity in both directions, so it doesn't stop. Yeah, maybe it stops here with death. I don't know, but in the other direction, life creates life. And this is where it gets really interesting, because choosing also means, when you choose, you actually choose. That is the thing I want to say. That means if you choose over and over again, you get a habit, right? So the higher order of a choice is a habit. And when you choose over and over again in this direction, it seems as our resources are drained. So that means that when we do that, the resources goes away, and it will be harder and harder for us to see that there is another world. So actually, this is blacked out. So you actually you don't have the ability to move in this direction actually. And what happens in the other direction when you choose over and over again is that you gain resources. So it actually gets easier and easier, and you can actually create such a setups here. That goes, we can call them life-affirming habits. So this is in some sense a recipe to work with this model. Can we set up design for life-affirming habits, and then a higher order of a habit is a paradigm. So I write that too. I don't know if it's paradigm. And we have been speaking about this whole weekend, about this paradigm shift that we're in. And then it gets very important, what kind of choices do we do? So this is actually what we wanted to share with you in this program, I guess. Is there anything else, Jens, you're thinking of that we haven't mentioned or that we should mention?
Yeah, I was just trying to come to the end of my point, and that it was the more you move into the direction that is best for the world, it also seems that the world gets more complex, and therefore you are actually not looking at the world anymore in this linear cause and effect relationship, but in a very complex way, where everything is affected again by your choice, and then by your direction that you're moving in. So you're having an influence, and again that is something, the notion of non-duality here is what you choose, what you bring into the room. This has an effect on the whole. So if you take care of yourself, if you are healthy, if you are prepared and be in a healthy mental state, you are also creating the resources, but not only the resources for yourself, but you're also creating a result for the whole. So actually by improving yourself, you're increasing the whole as well.
Yeah, and I can have a very physical example or mental example or whatever we call it. I can have an example. Right now, you and I, we have a dialogue, right? So I'm part of the dialogue, but the dialogue is also a part of me. So the only way that could happen is that it's the same thing. So right now, I am the dialogue, and the dialogue is me. And that is actually what this whole ID models implies. That you can't separate yourself. You can't separate it. As soon as you do that, you lose causality. You lose the effect of your choices, and you actually get you become a victim of circumstances.
I have a question for you, because we have been talking in the previous programs about the circular argumentation of measuring the external world with external environments. You have said now that there are three different dimensions: empathy before sympathy, proactivity before reactivity, and engagement over attendance. At the same time, you also said, if you have to make a choice and based on your resources, you are actually choosing empathy, proactivity, and engagement. So what I'm trying to say here is, the result that you're looking for is empathy, proactivity, and engagement, and the choice that you make is empathy, proactivity, and engagement. Isn't that a loophole as well?
No, it's not. It's actually the difference between working with a goal and being on a journey. So that is the difference here. It's actually, again, the perception, which is a perception shift from best in the world to best for the world. So it's actually different worldviews. In victim mode or best in the world worldview, we have to have goals. Otherwise, we don't know how to know that we're going in the right direction. But in the creator mode, we have a journey that we're on. You can see the journey almost like that you're out on a what do you call it, a big quest, or in Swedish we say äventyr. What is the name of that?
Adventure.
Adventure, yes, sorry. You're on an adventure, and but there are guiding principles on this adventure. And when we look into the bigger thought systems that we have had previously in the history of humanity, it speaks its own language actually, because if you dig into them, you probably find things that are very similar to what you have in front of you right now, the empathy, proactivity, and engagement. So this is maybe other words, but it's definitely the same direction, I would say. Because if there is a narrow road to follow, it has to lead somewhere.
So what you're saying is, I think, also very congruent to complexity theory, is that you use organizing principles to guide your sense making and your decision making when you not exactly know where you're going.
You talk about heuristic principles. Instead of simplifying the system as by reducing it, we have simple heuristic principles or guiding principles. So it's not a principle that you have to always follow. So in most cases you follow it. But there are, of course, occasions. Just look on your own life. Every day you do choices that put you either in this one or in the other direction. So it doesn't have to be like right or wrong. It's more about what do we practice, and as we practice, it also opens up. So when we practice a choice, it opens up for new choices. So that's the interesting thing here. As you said, working with empathy, proactivity, engagement leads to empathy, proactivity, and engagement also.
So let me try to give an example then and see if that's coherent with our language and if I have understood the principle behind it. So my context is organizational development, and if, for example, an organization wants to go into the direction of self-management and become, self-organized at some point, the way of getting there has to then be self-organized as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it can't be...
I wouldn't say can't, but I say...
But it's very difficult to reach a state of self-organization if somebody is demanding and controlling and project managing it.
Yeah, it could be, but on the other hand, we also know some interesting thing from psychology. For instance, if you're happy, you laugh, but if you laugh, you get happy. So I wouldn't say it's more difficult, actually. I don't know that. Maybe it is, but if you're asking me, I don't know. Maybe you have some kind of an idea here, which I see where you want to go, but I can't say that it is. I don't really know, actually. But I definitely it in terms of practicing, definitely, because if you practice then you get what do you call it? You master things when you practice it.
So, and that's what you're saying. If you practice empathy, proactivity, and engagement, and choosing it on a daily and on a habitual basis, then you will also end up as a result with empathy, proactivity, and engagement.
But
or it's at least highly likely.
Highly likely, but at the same time, this is where and both an and comes in instead of either a nor, and that is at the same time you're never farther away than a choice. So it's if there is some duality in this is the duality in that case. Maybe it's not called duality, but it's very interesting because as you say, you get better by practicing. That's something we know from learning theory and stuff like that. And yeah, you can just look at any sports or any situation where you have to learn something. If you practice, you get better. So that is that is definitely true. But at the same time, it's just a choice away. So and I will also say, depending on, we have one of the topics that have also come up over and over again during this weekend is competition and working together as a rule instead of competition as a rule. We have had it in so many different shows here and programs. And if you look then at the ID model, one could say that the victim mode, it's actually, if you use the words of game theory, you realize it's a limited what do you call it, game board. We have a set of rules you have to follow, and the players are predefined. So it's like playing chess. So here is playing chess, right? And if we play chess and you say, "Oh, Stella, now you're checkmate," then I die, and then it's over. Okay, so and then on this side it's interesting because here we have an infinite game plan. Players come and go, and rules are made up. This means if we're taking the same board of chess, played it here, and then all of a sudden you say, "Stellan, you're checkmate," and then I would say, "Oh, lucky me then, my king can walk three levels up," so I can actually change the rules. I can change the game plan itself. And I can also say, no, it wasn't even chess we were playing. We were playing whatever, or we didn't play at all. So game theory is also described within this model, I would say. And the interesting thing is that we are probably, concerning the game plan, we have been in an infinite game plan for maybe 50 years. But we still have players that are playing this game, where the purpose of this game is to win. The purpose of this game is to keep it going as long as we can. And the problem is when we mix in this shift that we have been experiencing for many years, actually, we realize there are only losers. So the players that are who play to win, they play the ones that want to keep it going as long as they can. So this is very interesting, and as we are now in the situation we are in the world, where the whole world is in sync, let's make the choices for the future and make them now and make them best for the world.
And I would like to, invite the viewers and listeners to reflect on. Can you recognize this model or a direction in this model in the concepts that we have been describing and that have been presented during the weekend? For me, because it's just recently happened, is the Enstat Atrivasi. Can you see which direction the approach that is
the social lab,
the social innovation lab,
earlier, yeah.
That is described there? Can you recognize the empathy, proactivity, and engagement in that approach? Can you see a direction? One thing that is maybe very relevant to businesses is the creating business in the new paradigm. The radio intentional decision that you talked with Pontus Fristedt about how to look at tools that we use on a daily basis from the lens of the new paradigm, or as we say now, the existing paradigm, because we are already in it.
Oh, okay, so now you new words here. Okay, that's cool. Okay, emerging.
The emerging paradigm.
The emerging paradigm.
Can we look through the tools that we currently use from a perspective of empathy, proactivity, and engagement, and what happens then?
We can easily update them. That was actually what Pontus Fristedt, who was here earlier, said, that now it's the time to update all those, because if we keep using the previous versions of those tools, it won't take us forward any longer.
Exactly. So this is what I hope we have been showing with that this model has been used or is applied, even though some people have not directly used it or consciously used it, or maybe have used a different version and not exactly these words. The direction that we are speaking about, that is best for the world, is, I think, can be seen in most of the examples that we have presented during the weekend.
Yes, and I would say the same, and I also would like to invite more of you out there in the world to contact us and to connect with other tools you have that are speaking the same language, maybe other models. We know that the intentional decision model is congruent with different already known models. For instance, in the Buddhistic concept, there is one called 10 levels of consciousness, I think it is, or 10 levels of life. I can't really the English wordings there, and there is also a Vedic Vedic model that is part of the fundamentals for spiral dynamics, leading to Richard Barrett's 7 levels of consciousness, which is also connecting to existing models as Maslow hierarchical need theory pyramid. And we also know that there are more thought models in this direction, and that can be explained. You were going to say something here.
Yes, since you were struggling a little bit with finding the right words, you have been written this book, Medved Naval, which is basically explaining the model, and the book is, unfortunately, I would say, for most of the people out there, only in Swedish available, and that is why we are also looking for people who can help us translate this.
And collaborate maybe in publishing the book in various languages.
Yes, exactly. And there is already a leaflet existing.
Yeah, a shorter booklet with the first 3 chapters, I guess it is. It's called An Intentional Story of Intent. So we took the 2 first chapters describing the model, and then we added a pre-chapter to get some kind of a story connected to it. And we actually struggled with it, because you should know that this kind of models must be seen from the context that you are in, that is the historic of ideas that you are part of. So by just translating it to English made us we really had to put ourselves in that context, historic of ideas that goes for in this case it's the British English story that has to be it's seen from that type of context.
Yeah, so what we're asking here is contacts for or collaboration on the direction that we would like to take. Let's put it like this. Our intention here is to publish an English version of that book, and therefore we are looking for collaborators, as you said, with a understanding of the context, British English context that exist currently.
Yeah, or American English maybe. It doesn't really matter, but at least English. But it could also be other languages. So if you're a publisher or you have good contacts, or you want to invest in the publishing of this book, we see it as a collaborative possibility. And the booklet, Intentional Story of Intent, is actually an open source right now, so you can download it. You type in bit.ly, it's some kind of a service, bit.ly, and then / intentional decisions.
Yes, and we have also posted it as at the background at our website, bestforthe.world. You find the description, video, and the booklet under background.
Thank you very much for both listening and viewing, and we will end this session, and in hopefully in a couple of, maybe not minutes, but we have to take a little break to drink something. We will also have the concluding remarks and the reflection of this whole weekend here in this sofa. So yeah, stay tuned, and thank you so far.
Living in, we are competing in, we are repeating in, we are believing in. It's time for us to shift our mind from best in the world to best for the world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. It creates a new world to mind a shift, intentionality, perceptuality, conceptuality. We are choosing to shift our mind to best for the world, best for our world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional.